Hello, everyone. Today we are going to look at biological molecules, the building blocks of life. So far, we've been talking about properties and characteristics that are required for sustaining life. And we're going to look at a set of molecules that are sometimes referred to as macromolecules as the building blocks for life. So we've discussed that carbon is the backbone for all living things. It is often said that life itself is carbon-based. That means that carbon atoms form the fundamental components of many of the molecules that are found in living things. Carbon is amongst those four abundant elements that we identified in our last unit. The four elements that are in abundance in all living things, the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. We're going to take a look today at how those elements are the building blocks and major components for these biological molecules that we require for life processes. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we sometimes refer to these biological molecules as macromolecules. By definition, macromolecules are the large molecules necessary for life, and they're built from smaller organic molecules. Okay, so we're going to introduce some new terms here. One being monomers and polymers. Okay, these macromolecules are large complex molecules that are made or built from smaller molecules that we refer to as monomers. Okay, an example of a monomer is a glucose molecule. Okay, glucose is our preferred energy source. Okay, and so two or more glucose molecules linked together would be considered a polymer. Okay, so the monomer is the subunit or the building block for making a larger, more complex molecule, such as the polymer. Okay, if we look at our prefixes here, we see the prefix mono, and then we see the prefix poly. Okay, mono means one, poly means many. All right, so two or more glucose molecules linked together would be considered a polymer. Carbohydrates are one of the most, if not the most important macromolecules that we need for life. All right, we consume carbohydrates in a lot of the foods that we eat on a daily basis, and it's absolutely essential for us as humans because it is the preferred energy source. Okay, we talked about cellular respiration and how we consume foods, particularly these carbohydrates, and how our bodies then process these carbohydrates in order to release energy into our bodies. Okay. And so carbohydrates are important. This is our first class of macromolecules. Okay. They are a major food source and a key form of energy for most organisms. They consist of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Okay, and so this is going to be the most abundant biomolecule for us. All right, so carbohydrates are very important. I know sometimes we, hear that carbohydrates are bad and they get a bad rap sometime when you think about diseases and illnesses such as diabetes and so forth, but we absolutely need carbohydrates with most things. Portion control is what's important. It's not the carbohydrates that are bad, but it's, the conversation is more so about, what types of carbohydrates are you eating and the amounts that you're eating. Carbohydrates are built from smaller building blocks. Okay, these simple sugars such as glucose are the monomers or building blocks for more complex carbohydrates. Some examples of these monomers are monosaccharides. Okay, examples include glucose, fructose, galactose. All right, we do consume these examples in a lot of the different food sources that we take in. Okay, glucose again is going to be the preferred energy source for most living things, but in the absence of glucose, other forms of carbs can be useful. And so when we consider the macromolecule being a complex, large molecule that's built from smaller molecules, we need to consider the linkage mechanism. Okay, in terms of large complex molecules, these monosaccharides can be joined together through glycosidic linkages. Okay, which are basically linking sugar moieties or sugar molecules together to create these complex carbohydrates, such as starch. Okay, so we've identified the scientific term for many molecules that are linked together, and we call that a what? Polymer. Okay, and so the glycosidic bonds, the glycosidic linkages, are responsible for the assembly or synthesis of these new complex carbohydrates from our monosaccharides. Okay, and we also have some disaccharides. They are a little bit more complex. Okay, examples are maltose, lactose, and sucrose. Okay, you should definitely jot these down in your notes, some of the different types of sugars that exist. All right, these are disaccharides. It's going to be formed from joining together two monosaccharides. Okay, again, we're practicing looking at our prefixes here in biology. Disaccharides, that prefix di means two. So disaccharides are created by linking together two monosaccharides, okay? So examples of our disaccharides are gonna be maltose, lactose, and sucrose, okay? Maltose is gonna be made from joining together two glucose molecules. Lactose is made from joining together two lactose is formed by joining together glucose and galactose. And finally, sucrose is created by joining together glucose and fructose. Okay. And so these complex carbs, again, are typically going to be the ones that we're consuming in our diet on a day-to-day basis. And they are, again, made up of longer chains of sugars. All right. Another example of a carbohydrate is cellulose. All right, cellulose is a type of carbohydrate that is found in plants. Okay, these are not going to be starches or carbs that we consume because our bodies do not have the enzymatic capability to break down these cellulose molecules. Okay, we can digest starch, but we cannot digest cellulose. Okay, so do make a note of that. There's different types of carbohydrates, and they're not all are going to be consumed. Okay, our next class of macromolecules are lipids. Lipids. I'm sure you've heard about lipids before. This is also a very important macromolecule when you consider living things, particularly in the context of the cell. Okay, we know that all living things are made up of cells. Okay, and all cells have a cell membrane. Okay, also referred to as the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane, the cell membrane, is made up of a structure known as a lipid, phospholipid layer. Okay, so these lipids are super important in terms of maintaining the integrity of the cell membrane. All right, that cell membrane becomes the first line of defense for the cell. Okay. And so lipids are a class of organic compounds that are fatty acids or the derivatives of fatty acids, okay? These fats, as we may have discussed a little bit, are typically going to be insoluble in water, but they can be soluble in other organic solvents, okay? So if you remember our conversation on last unit, we identified some properties of water and how water is sometimes referred to as a universal solvent because it can dissolve a lot of substances, but we did discuss some exceptions, and some of those exceptions included, oils and fats. Okay. And so lipids are typically going to be insoluble in water. All right. Lipids include oils, waxes, and steroids. Okay. So the lipids can exist in both a solid and liquid state. Okay. Lipids that are solid at room temperature are going to be things like your waxes and lard, things that your grandmother used to cook with. Okay. Lipids that are going to be liquid at room temperature are typically going to be the oils. All right. And again, due to these non-polar properties of lipids, they do not mix well with water. Okay. We contrasted those concepts of hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Okay. These lipids are going to be hydrophobic in nature because they do not mix well with water. Okay, lipids that are liquid at room temperature are usually going to be composed of unsaturated fatty acids. Oleic acids and linoleic acids are unsaturated fatty acids that are common in the cooking oils, the vegetable oils that we cook with. Okay, if you ever took a quick glance at your ingredients, your nutrition label on your cooking oil, you're probably going to see the oleic acids and linoleic acids. Okay, those are your unsaturated fatty acids. And so again, back to this conversation of the macromolecules and their requirement for life. This phospholipid molecule is extremely important. Okay, all living things are made up of cells, and the phospholipid molecule is the one of the major components in the cell membrane. I think I alluded to it earlier. Okay, the cell membrane is this outer protective layer around the cell that's going to, it has a lot of functions, but one of the most important functions is being a barrier and separating the internal compartments of the cell from the external environment. Okay, and so that cell membrane, it sort of serves as a barrier for regulating the entry and exit of molecules into and out of the cell. And so again, we talked about this concept of maintaining homeostasis and so forth. You certainly want to have mechanisms in place to control what's coming into the cell and what's going out. Okay, that's one of the ways we try and maintain that homeostatic environment. The cell membrane facilitates that. Okay, and so this phospholipid is a very interesting molecule, and it has both hydrophilic and hydrophobic components. Okay, so you have a head region and then you have a tail region on this phospholipid molecule. And that head region is going to be the hydrophilic region. Okay, it's going to interact with water, right? Because when we think about the where the cell is located, it's going to be in an aqueous environment. Okay, so those hydrophilic tails are going to be on the outside of the cell membrane, and then we have those hydrophobic tails linking together in the middle. And so what's happening is this cell membrane structurally is referred to as a phospholipid bilayer. Okay, and again, if we remembered our prefixes here, we have a phospholipid bilayer, which is essentially two layers of phospholipids joining together to form this membrane structure around the cell. And so we have our hydrophilic heads on the outside interacting with that aqueous environment, and we have our hydrophobic tails buried in the middle. Okay, the hydrophobic tails are buried in the middle of this bilayer. Okay, that lipid layer, that phospholipid bilayer, is again responsible for, creating that barrier between the internal cell, inside of the cell, and the external environment. Okay. Steroids are another example of lipids. Okay, we have various uses for the cholesterol, testosterone, estrogen. All right, they're all very important. Estrogen and your testosterone are very important hormones in the body. Okay. One of the things that you can do right now is stop for a moment and think about some examples of foods that you eat that contain lipids. Okay, we do need lipids. All right, we need those fats. Okay, and as I said before, in relation to the carbohydrates, it's not that the carbohydrates are bad. It's not that the fats are bad. It's how much, the amount, the types of fats that you're eating. So we need to be mindful of that. We do need to consume fats. We need fats. Okay. I would like you to stop right now and compare and contrast carbohydrates and lipids. Okay, in your notes. How are carbohydrates and lipids different from one another? Okay, these are two different molecules, structurally, functionally. What are the building blocks of carbohydrates? What are the building blocks of lipids? Okay, now would be a great time to pause your video and work through those questions. Okay. So our next class of macromolecules or biological molecules are proteins. Okay. You've heard about proteins before. Proteins are very important. Okay. These are, again, these macromolecules are made from smaller subunits that are joined together. Okay. Amino acids are going to be the monomers for proteins. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. All right, the monomer here, and you can see structurally this amino acid has two distinct subunits. We have our amino group, and then we have this carboxylic group down here, the COOH. Okay. When two amino acids are joined together, they are held together by a peptide bond. Okay, the peptide bond is the linkage between amino acids, okay, to form this polypeptide or this protein. Okay, so what is the scientific term for many monomers linked together? We call that a polymer, right? And so our polymer in this case is going to be our protein. Okay, proteins are made by linking together chains of amino acids. Okay, these amino acids are held together by our peptide bond. So proteins derive their function from their structure. There's a relationship between the structure and function of proteins. Okay, there are 4 different levels of protein structure that you should jot down. Okay, there's primary structure, secondary structure, tertiary structure, and quaternary structure. Okay, primary structure of an amino acid is simply the linear sequence of amino acids. Okay, so this is just your long chain of amino acids that are joined together by peptide bonds. Okay, the secondary structure of the amino acid is made by the interactions between adjacent amino acids. Okay, secondary structure here is one example, is the alpha helix here. An example of the secondary structure of a protein. Okay, the tertiary structure of a protein is due to the 3D folding of that polypeptide chain. Okay. Tertiary structure, we might have three-dimensional foldings taking place in that polypeptide chain. And then finally, we have the quaternary structure. The quaternary structure is the interactions or arrangements between multiple polypeptide chains, okay? So there's typically going to be more than one polypeptide chain responsible for that quaternary structure, okay, in our proteins. So there's different types of proteins. Again, they all have very different functions. Some proteins like keratin are structural proteins. So we have structural proteins, okay, keratin, okay. We know that keratin is very important for structure of our hair, hair follicles, hair cells, okay. Another type of protein or structural proteins are actin and myosin fibers, okay? These play a role in our muscle cell development, spider webs, silk. These are other examples of structural proteins, actin and myosin. Another type of protein are hormones, okay? Hormones, for example, insulin. Our bodies produce different hormones, and we, again, our bodies attempt to, you know, regulate things, and insulin is an example of a hormone that when the function of this hormone is not happening the way that it should, or is there's a malfunction in the amount of insulin or how your body uses insulin, that would result in an individual being considered type 1 or type 2 diabetic. Okay, so hormones are a type of protein. Another type of protein are enzymes. Okay, I'm sure you've heard about enzymes before. Okay, enzymes function by catalyzing chemical reactions. Okay, we discussed chemical reactions already when we talked about metabolism, right, as one of our requirements for life. All right, metabolism. Okay, the total sum of all the reactions that takes place in a living thing. Okay, we talked about these metabolic activities being either catabolic or anabolic. Okay, so these reactions can build things up, synthesize new molecules, or we can break down other molecules. Okay, so enzymes are very important in all living things. Okay, so again, by function, enzymes are catalysts. Okay, they are biological catalysts that help to speed up or increase the rate of chemical reactions. Okay, and we'll talk in another few chapters in a little bit more detail about enzymes and how they function. Okay, they function by lowering the activation energy of a chemical reaction, and we'll get to that later. Okay. Some other types of proteins are transport proteins. Okay, transport proteins are very important. One example is the hemoglobin protein. Okay, this protein functions by carrying oxygen, okay, in our blood. All right, this hemoglobin protein is responsible for transporting our oxygen through our blood, okay, throughout our bodies. Okay, it's a very important protein. So this is another type of protein, transport protein. So we've got structural proteins, we've got transport proteins, we've got our hormones, we've got enzymes. These are all types of proteins that, as I said before, have very unique functions in organisms. Okay. When we talk about the structure of the protein, we should definitely pause to mention that the structure of the protein can be altered, okay, chemically or physically. Okay, so things like heat, acidity are all factors that can change the structure of a protein, and we refer to that process as denaturing. Okay, write down the term denature. Okay, denaturing changes the shape or structure of a protein. Okay, which in turn changes the functionality of that protein. Okay, we certainly want you to understand the connection between structure and function here when we're talking about proteins. If you change or alter the shape of that protein, there's a large possibility that you're going to be altering the functionality of that protein. Okay, and so denaturing is what we refer to that process as. Okay, the shape of the protein determines its function. Okay, so the shape of an individual protein is determined by the order of amino acids in that primary chain. All right, we talked about the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structure of the protein, and that primary structure is simply, again, that linear sequence of amino acids that's joined together by those peptide bonds. Okay, and so denaturing, for example, if we were to heat that protein, okay, if we were to expose it to some extreme heat, that protein will begin to denature. Okay, it can change the twists and folds that would typically be characteristic of that protein. Okay, in that final shape, which would determine its functionality. Okay, and if you change that shape, you're going to alter the function of your protein. Okay. Okay, so let's take a pause here. Now is a great time for you to stop and think about what we just said about this class of biological molecules, our proteins. List some examples of specific types of proteins, okay? Some specific types of proteins. Now would be a great time to look back through your notes and make sure that you can list some specific types of proteins, okay? And their functions, okay? And then so now is a great time for you to think, why are there so many different kinds of proteins? Why? Why do you think there's so many different kinds of proteins? Okay. Our last class of macromolecules or biological molecules that are required for life are nucleic acids. Okay, nucleic acids are monomers that build up larger, more complex molecules such as our DNA. Okay, nucleic acid examples are DNA and RNA. All right, the subunits or monomers that are responsible for nucleic acids that build nucleic acids are nucleotides. Okay, the monomer for making nucleic acids are nucleotides. These are our building blocks for making our nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. I'm sure you've heard about them before. Okay, we talked about heredity as one of our characteristics of life. Okay, heredity. Okay, we inherit this DNA. Okay, our structural blueprint for life. All right, nucleotides. So nucleotides link together to form nucleic acids. So the building blocks of these nucleic acids are nucleotides. Okay, these nucleotides are said to have a sugar phosphate backbone. Okay, as the sugar and phosphate group within this nucleotide join together with sugar and phosphates on the next nucleotide to make a nucleic acid chain. Okay, so we have the sugar group on one nucleotide bonding to the phosphate group on another nucleotide. So structurally, the nucleotide has three components, okay? It has a sugar group, a phosphate group, and a nitrogenous base, okay? This entire unit right here is a nucleotide. This is one nucleotide. This is another nucleotide. And then this is also a nucleotide, okay? A nucleotide has three components, okay? A sugar group, okay? This 5-carbon sugar, this pentose, okay? Phosphate group, and one of the nitrogenous bases, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, or uracil, okay? Depending on the nucleic acid. DNA, arguably the most important nucleic acid, is a double-stranded molecule, okay? It has 2 strands of nucleotides that are essentially winding around each other in sort of a helix formation, okay? This helix formation, these double strands of nucleotides, these 2 strands of nucleotides are held together by hydrogen bonds in the middle connecting our nitrogenous bases, okay? So we have hydrogen bonds in this helix structure, but we also have another type of bond here. It's called the phosphodiester bond. Phosphodiester bond is also a very critical linkage in the DNA molecule. Okay, the phosphodiester bond is responsible for the linkage between these adjacent nucleotides. Okay, you have the phosphate group on one nucleotide bonding to the sugar group on the next nucleotide. Okay, ATP is a very important structure or molecule that's responsible for energy. Okay, it's a storage form of energy. All right, and one of the things I want us to be able to do at this point is you should be able to fill this table out. Okay, from the things that we talked about in this lecture, you should be able to identify the corresponding polymer that is made from the linkages of these monomers. Okay, so we talked about simple sugars. Okay, the polymer in this case would be what? Okay, what is the biological molecule that is created from joining together simple sugars? What polymers are made? Okay, your answer should be complex carbohydrates. All right, what polymer is made from joining together amino acids? Your answer should be proteins. Okay, what polymer is made from joining together our fatty acids? Okay, that's how we make our lipids. And then lastly, what macromolecule is made from joining together our nucleotides? Nucleic acids. Okay, you should be able to complete this table if I removed any of these spaces. Okay, you should be able to identify the monomer, the polymer, and some examples of each of these types of biological molecules. Okay, so we talked today about the 4 classes of biological molecules that are required for life. We have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Now is a great time for you to stop the video, look back through your notes, use your textbook to fill in any gaps in understanding that you may have, but certainly at this point, you should understand the building blocks of each of our nucleic acids, lipids, proteins, carbohydrates, the building blocks, the elements that are involved, and some examples of each, and how we utilize, like, what is the importance? What are the roles of each of these classes of biological molecules? Okay, why are they important? Okay, what would be the outcome if we did not contain these biological molecules as we should. Okay, we'll stop here today.